it was just the best. It was so rewarding and fulfilling, and it made me no money. I didn't care.
Hello, Edibuddies. Welcome back to the Edibuddies podcast. My name is Kara. I'm a fiction editor, and this is a show about writing, editing, and the friends you can make along the way. Just before we get started, I do have a quick request. If you enjoy listening to this show, it would help me out immensely if you would leave a rating and a review on whatever podcasting apps you like and use. It should only take you a couple minutes, but it will really make a difference to help me grow my audience. So thanks in advance if you do that, and if not, as my mother would say, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Moving on, today's episode is brought to you by onomatopoeia. Did I say that right?
Onomatopoeic words. Words inspired by sound. Boom, bang, splash.
Onomatopoeia is one of my favorite words to say and one of my least favorite to spell. But I have a trick. So you start with an O and then no, like, oh no, why am I trying to spell this word? And then you just give up and Google it because Google knows better. You might be wondering, why am I talking so much about sound effect words? For this month's episode, I spoke with Kris Simon of IDW Comics. Kris's full title is, well, really long.
It used to be just group editor of collected editions, and then it became group editor of collected editions and original graphic novels. And then it became collected editions, graphic novels, and new initiatives because they wanted to add in like webtoons and stuff. And I wasn't doing foreign licensing, so there was also foreign licensing was in there.
I think that reflects her long experience with comics and also writing and editing in general. Her story is a window into this creative industry that is full of passion and starving artistry and sometimes really grouchy people. And it's just fascinating because it's something that I haven't known as much about, but I know so many people who love comics, and I know really incredible, beautiful stories are told through the medium of comics. So Kris brought a perspective that was so wonderful for me to hear, and I can't wait to share it all with you. Take a listen. I hope you love it.
I ended up as an editor because I always loved writing, and that was my major. And so I knew that I was either going to write or do something writing related when I graduated. And my original dream was a children's book, because it incorporated writing and drawing. That was my goal when I graduated. But my husband was very involved in comics. And so he kind of sparked my interest because we were in the 90s and it was the image boom. And all these amazing comics were coming out at the time. And so I got super sucked in to comic books, and I just knew I wanted to be a part of it. It fit exactly what I wanted to do. And so I was like, you know what, this is it for me. I've found it. And so I spent my time at conventions, submitting things, getting portfolio reviews with like my husband's artwork and like, my writing and blah, blah, blah. And we just kept getting rejected to the point where they got to know me at Image because I kept submitting. And then
they were like, you're the one we always reject, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it was like, sorry, not this time. Oh, Kris, go look next time, like that.
Oh.
And, and so finally, I was hired on to do a book completely separate from my husband called Small Gods. And that was in 2000, I think, 3. Yeah, it was 2003. And it was with actually the guy who used to run Ozfest or OzCon. Is that what it's called in Australia? He wrote a book called Small Gods, and he hired me to be an editor. And together we found an artist and we submitted. And I got a very joyous email back of like, you did it. You made it. This one. Yeah. And I was so excited. And so, of course, it went for a while. It went for over a year. And then we voluntarily decided to cancel it because the numbers weren't where we wanted them to be. They were okay, but there was such a backlash when we canceled it ourselves that we actually revived it and brought it back for like a one shot. And of course, Image let us do it. And it was so super fun. And while I was doing that, it was the time when Jim Valentino stepped down as publisher and Eric Larson took over. And so Jim decided he wanted to start up Shadowline. And he said, "Do you want to be the editor in chief of Shadowline?" And I said, yes. And at that point, I was freelance editing Hero Camp with Robbie Rodriguez, and I was editing Small Gods. And I think when Jim brought everything back, I did Shadowhawk for him. I did everything creator owned that Jim put out. So he put out a bunch. He put out one called The Intimidators. He put out Task Force One. He had a whole slew of stuff that he created and wrote, and we hired artists for, and I was the editor on that. And so I did that for, I think it was like about 7 years. And that's where I really learned everything there is to know about editing, publishing, like just from top to bottom. Like that was a crash course. Like it was just me and him just doing it all.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, because Image is like all self-sufficient. So, yes, they print it for you, but everything else, like the pre-press, post-press, everything is just all hands-on. So I learned literally everything during that time.
So give me an idea of what your kind of day-to-day, like how much like actual editing were you doing versus how much of the like were you shepherding the process?
Yes. So I was doing all the editing. I had about 12 books at any given time, which was back then a lot. Yeah, now it's not really a lot, but back then it was a lot. And
but when you say 12 books, you're not talking about like novel length. You're talking about like titles that you were in charge of.
Titles at a time. Yeah, and they were all coming out at different times, and we worked months ahead. And we would go through submissions once a month and accept or reject. And basically, yeah, it was full editing of every single series, plus shepherding, what is it that they call that? Trafficking. They call it trafficking. So yeah, working with the production designers at Image and going to conventions, doing portfolio reviews, all that stuff. It was all there.
Wow. So when you say it was like a crash course, what do you feel like were kind of the biggest things you had to learn like right away?
I think it was, well, first of all, I was never like involved in the technical aspects of comics. And so, and Jim he'd been doing it his whole life. And so essentially what he taught me was the format of comics, which is, the Z format of the way your eye reads and how every page is a cliffhanger, and then you have the page turn, like everything like that I was not really familiar with, but knew as a reader because you read it, but you don't really focus on it. And so it was more than just, making sure that you have, the right amount of dialogue in a balloon and that the balloon's not covering anything like that. And it's going in the Z pattern. But it was very much like, him over my shoulder being like, no, this is how it has to go. Like, you have to do it like this, this, and this. This is the way comics are made. This is the way it flows. And this is, you always want to start off with a bang. You don't start off like a novel where it's slow and it builds up. You always start with the big moment, and then there's the pacing and it goes up and down, up and down. So it's like, the highs and the lows, and then you end on the high and you start on the high, and it's like cliffhanger, boom, it was very technical. So I learned all of that, and it was not so much like him like telling me specifics. It was him writing the scripts and him telling me what to look out for. So it was like we would get in these scripts, he'd be like, this is all messed up. And I was like, well, I thought I read okay. And he was like, absolutely not. This isn't read okay at all. Like, are you kidding me? And he'd point out what was wrong. And I was like, oh, yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how wonderful though to have like a mentor that was like ready to like pass all that information on to you.
Which he always hated, by the way. He never wanted to be called a mentor, ever.
Really?
Really.
He was just the dude showing you stuff.
I guess, it was more like, I don't know, like I hired you for a reason, like you're good. And so just trust it, just trust the process kind of a thing. And sure, he would tell me where I screwed up, but like also, he wasn't really that nice. Like, yeah, anyone who knows Jim Valentino, like he's outward facing nice, but like in reality, he's really grumpy. And so he probably won't listen to this, so I don't care. But yeah, he was like kind of mean. Like if you did it wrong, you really got yelled at.
I will say, like, I have noticed an exceptional amount of grouchy people in the comics industry compared to some of the others in the media sphere. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of my time after I left Image was repairing relationships with people.
Really?
Yeah, because Jim burned a lot of bridges with people. And I feel like I got the brunt of that a lot. And so I literally had to make amends with people and be like, I'm really sorry that this happened. And yeah. So it was kind of like an apology tour afterwards. The whole process of it was just a terrible, terrible thing. And I don't look back on it fondly, but I am grateful for the experience, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I've had that foundational job too, where it's like, I learned what I needed to learn, but like, fuck that place.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
It is so funny too. And I think it's true of any industry, but I think also like anything that's art and where you're dealing with like for storytelling, like the relationships make or break the whole thing. They really do. And I think it's really sad that a lot of people don't seem to understand that.
I mean, and now like, especially because there's that trending hashtag right now, comics broke me, is people's stories about how mistreated they are, how underpaid, how overworked. And I 100% understand that because I was making $300 a book when I was working at Image. And I didn't like want to post this or anything. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I'd rather leave it in my past. But, I was making maybe $900 like, a month. And I was expected to pay my rent. I was expected to do everything off of that. And he expected me to be grateful for that. He was like, I'm giving you this opportunity, and he's like, I'm paying your way to go to conventions. I'm paying for the hotel. I bought you a laptop. And I'm thinking to myself, you should be doing those things. Like
That's what you do in a job.
Yeah. I'm like, and then he's like, he would give me a bonus at the end of the year, act like it was this huge generous thing. And I'm like, you realize I'm making like 15K a year.
Yeah.
And I was newly divorced. I was living on my own. I was just like, I had to take a part-time job, like to make ends meet. And he got angry at me for that. Like, he was just like, you're never around anymore. Like, I can't and it was just, I would get yelled at all the time. And like, I was pretty much like verbally abused. And, and I sit there and I think that was how many years ago?
Yeah.
And people are still being treated that way. And it's not cool. And like, I can't, it's because it's freelance comics, it's like, it's like if you don't do the job, someone else will.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know what it is about comics that like everyone is just like, you can't leave it behind. It's like once you're in it, you're in it. And like, it's just, that's it. Like it's almost like you're an addict. Like you can't get out of it. And once you're out of it, you miss it and you want to go back. It's like,
yeah. Well, let's dive into that. Let's go into your childhood. No,
yeah, right.
I mean, clearly, like you said, you went to college, you were a fiction writer in college, you have a passion for storytelling. And so tell me a little bit about that. Like, what drew you to writing and storytelling in general before you ever landed in comics?
When I was in high school, I had a really great English teacher, and she did a creative writing class. Her name was Mrs. Rule, and she did rule. And she, I just absolutely fell in love with writing. I just did. I just loved it so much. I had so many stories like I felt like I wanted to tell, but I wasn't doing it right, and I knew and like it was uncomfortable. They just ramble. Learning to learn structure. I decided to go in art school, and I just remember my parents being like, okay, this isn't going to make you a lot of money, right? Like, just, we're going to let you do this, but just be aware of what you're getting into. And I was like, yes, I'm fully prepared to be a starving artist.
To be poor.
It'll be okay. And I'm like, what was I thinking? Like,
what were some foundational titles of comics that made you go, yeah, I get this. This is for me. I want to do this.
Well, I through high school and also all through college, I worked at bookstores. So I just, was looking like the children's books are, there are just so many of them. And there were some that were so clever that I was just blown away. Like they were for adults, but like your kids could read them and like
Mhm.
get a good kick out of it. And I just thought that was so clever. And I was like, man, if I had that kind of wit. And the thing that I did was I wrote a story, like in college, a children's story for my family. And I don't know what possessed me to do it. It just, as a child, my mother had planted a little tiny blue spruce tree outside my bedroom window. She planted a bunch, but it was the only one that survived. As I grew up, it grew. And so now it like towers over the house. It's huge. And I named it Bruce, the little blue spruce. And they gave me a pet rabbit when I was 11, 10, I don't know, somewhere in there. And he used to sit outside underneath the blue spruce tree and it would just chill. And I created this story in college about their relationship. And it turned into this thing about Bruce, wanting to be a Christmas tree, but he was blue, not green. And so he felt like he didn't fit in, he didn't belong. And this rabbit comes along and just loves him, like just wants to sit under him and just like thinks like, you're the best, like you're perfect the way you are, like don't ever change. And so, of course, Bruce learns to, accept himself, accept his differences. Like maybe I'm special then, because I'm not like the others. And eventually, of course, goes on to become a Christmas tree. And so I wrote this story and literally my entire family was in tears. I read it at Christmas. And of course, I published it and Jim drew it. Jim Valentino drew it and I published it under, I started a children's line of books at Image. It was their first one ever. It was all board books. And we did Dear Dracula, which was our launch, which became an animation on Cartoon Network, done by Josh Williamson. And we did just a whole bunch. I have a whole slew now. And it was really still a passion of mine. And I can't really say any one children's book influenced me to go in that direction. It was more of, as a whole, seeing all these clever books come out and thinking, wow, these kids don't even know that they're being taught things, they're just enjoying the story. And, I went on a whole book tour and I read it out loud to like a bunch of classes. And, all my friends were teachers at that point. And so like, I was like going to their classrooms and every single one just really related either to the tree or the bunny. It was one or the other. And it was so fascinating to me. And it brought me such joy, of seeing these kids just, even my ex-husband was like, he would text me and say, I'm reading this to my kid and he absolutely loves it. It's his favorite book, and it just, yeah, it was just the best. It was so rewarding and fulfilling.
Yeah.
And it didn't make me any money. It made me no money. I didn't care. Yeah, it was definitely like a dream fulfilled when that happened.
And now you spend the rest of your career chasing that high, right?
Yeah, but I got out of writing though, because at some point it becomes less about like, I don't have anything to say anymore, kind of. And instead, you have all these other writers who do have something they want to say, and they don't quite know how to get there. And so I love helping them get there. I love seeing the story and helping them develop it to its fullest potential, where literally you see the lights go off on their face and they're like, oh my God, like this is it. Like you've done it. Like this is the way to go, and they crack it, and it's just the most amazing feeling. So it's like almost like my dream got accomplished. Let me help you now accomplish yours, so
Yeah.
that's how I feel about editing. Like basically being an editor is like you're behind the scenes, like this is what you do. And so you have to be prepared for like a life of, basically starting people's careers and then just acting like it's no big deal and moving on. like basically creating the industry that the fans are like a part of, you're just like, that's it. Like, unsung heroes here.
Yeah, and I hear that across the industry, that's not exclusive to comics, of course. Like editors absolutely are. And I remember reading really early on when I decided to become an editor, I read an article from a journal editor, and he was basically like, if you saw the shit that comes across my desk that I make pretty for you, and then these writers get all the credit for their great ideas.
Yep.
It's like, these bitches can't even write. It's like, well, it's not that bad, but it is,
Yeah.
yeah, it is the
It can be
unsung.
though. Yeah, it can be. I know that, like, I literally was like, I feel like I'm not an editor on this anymore. I feel like I'm a script doctor.
Mm. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you said you worked on more than just comics. So I'm really curious, what is kind of universal in your experience to the editor role, and what is like very specific to kind of what you're doing now at IDW?
Well, universal, I guess, would be, you mean universal like across like fiction or just like comics versus?
Yeah, just I guess just a comparison of like in general, this is what we think of as what an editor does, and then a comics editor does that, but then also it has these other components to it.
I think it would have to be pacing. That's the biggest
Mm,
thing. Like pacing is the same across everything. Like I mean, it's a different kind of pacing, but pacing is what makes or breaks any
yeah,
story. It has to have the highs and lows. And, it's just like, a movie that's got, three acts to it. It's, you have to hit those points or else it just won't resonate with people. Um,
yeah.
and so I think that's universal. And, and also though, like rewriting people is never advised, like I have really run into a lot of that, and it's never a good situation. We have had to bring in writers to rewrite comics sometimes, because the scripts are so bad. And then I've also, on the novel side, hired people to write novels based on, an IP and have had them rewritten by the
Mm,
company. And never is it ever good.
yeah.
Never. Like, just don't do it, just either scrap it and get a new writer, like, or just leave it the way it is, one or the
Yeah.
other, because it never works out the way they think it's going to work out. So,
Is that just because when you try to bring somebody in to like work on the kernel of somebody else's idea, there just can never be like that full meshing, and so it just doesn't like work the same?
like, okay, so one of the instances I had was, I had, like, we were writing a Summoner's War novel, which, I'm hoping it's fine to talk about this, but it was so long ago. We hired Paul Jenkins, who's really well known, in the comic book industry, and he's written novels. And so we wrote him, we gave him the Bible. He knows his deal. He's won awards. He's a good writer and he's a good friend. And he made it through three-fourths of the way through, and my boss, who's the VP, was rewriting him. And it was, he thought Paul wasn't writing well. And it was a typical situation of like, an executive thinking he was a creative. And he didn't know structure, he didn't know anything. And we all had to sit there and watch it happen. And Paul's like, I can't let this go to print. It's not even my writing, it's bad now. And like, they all thought it was good. Like the executives thought it was good. And I'm sitting there appalled because I'm the editor. Paul is like, that's not even me anymore. And he quit. He quit.
Wow. Yeah.
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 Didn't even finish it. Like literally gave up the rest of the money that he was going to get. Like, half up front, half on the end. Absolutely not. He was like, mm-mm. And it was so bad. It was like, a daily phone call of me talking him off the ledge. And I felt horrible about it. And thank God it didn't ruin our relationship, which I'm very grateful for. But I've seen that also happen in comics where it's just, it's resentment, and it never turns out better. Like, so it's not even a matter of like the new writer coming in and not understanding. It's, it's almost like a betrayal.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, but I know how to do my job, and if someone doesn't know how to do their job, then just fire them. Don't do this whole fixing up script doctoring thing. And I've had to do it, but mostly when I say I've had to do it, it's because I've had to cut down scripts that are way too long, refigure the pacing, and then also redo the dialogue because it was shortened. And so at that point, it becomes quicker for me to do it than writer to go back in and do it. And I never, though, did it without full consent of the writer. Like, and they get, they look at it and they tweak it at the end and they go, this is good to go. It's still basically me, but I understand, and so, yeah, that's one of the biggies.
It's fascinating that you bring that up too, because I do think that there can be a misconception that editing and rewriting are like the same thing, or that editors are going to rewrite your work, which is like, we don't want to do that.
Mm.
We don't have time to do that. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Everything that I'm doing is looking at whatever you've given me and saying, how can I make this the best it can be? And that's it,
You ask questions. That's what you do. You read through and you say, does this make sense? Does this, like, if this is happening here, shouldn't this be happening here?
Right.
Like that, it's like you go through and you point out things that have been missed, like it doesn't make sense because you did this. There's no payoff happening when you did this. Like, where's this going? And it's, you tighten things up and, you just streamline things essentially. Writers just get it all down on the page and they need help to like narrow their focus a little bit. A really good example of that is that I had a writer who, and an artist, he was doing both, who literally was like, I don't know how to cut this down. It's too long and I don't know where to cut. Help me figure this out. And he had a scene in there and I said, okay, what's going on with this scene? And he's like, oh, well, this happens and this happens and this happens. And I said, yeah, but does it serve the story? It's a cool scene, but does it serve the story? And he was like, no. I'm like, then it has to go. That's what they pay you for, to make choices.
Yes.
Everything's their baby. So
editing is part like a writing job kind of, but like so much of it is therapy and just like relationships and helping people work through, like, because you're so right. Like, my favorite authors to work with are the ones who are so passionate and who actually care and are like, this is my baby and I like need this to be out in the world and I need it to be good. And it's like, I will take care of your baby, I promise. Like,
absolutely.
I'm not going to shred it to ribbons. So we kind of talked about the universal pacing and like, just don't rewrite people in general. What about, you talked a little bit about in comics how you were learning about, the Z and how your eyes have to move across the page. But obviously, like, the biggest thing that immediately sticks out to me with comics is that you have to be thinking and writing with the images in mind. And how does that, you as the editor, like, how are you making those different elements work together?
Well, I have to tell you, like, I have a system because it's really hard to keep track of everything, especially when you read a script, because I usually require a breakdown first, which is a page-to-page breakdown of like one sentence that encompasses what's happening on that page. And I number it 1 through 22 or 24 or 32, however long the issue is, I number it. And I ask for a breakdown of what's happening page to page. And when you get that breakdown, you can literally look at it and see the flow. And so you're like, oh, okay, this is the action, this is the break, this is the action, the break, the action, the cliffhanger, right? That right there, it's so easy to move things around at that point where you're just like, oh, okay, like, yeah, okay, you know what? We just move this scene up and then we have this scene happening here. We just do a little jiggle here and we can totally make this work. From there, then it has to be like, okay, also this is 5 panels, 3 panels, 2 panels, whatever it is, because you don't want to sit there and have 5, 5, 5, 5, and then all of a sudden have 8, and then like 8. So you also have to look at that, so that's why that breakdown is so important. And after I do the breakdown, then I say, okay, now we go into the paragraphs of what's happening on each page. And so there's a paragraph happening, and that is where I look at the panel count, I look at the paragraph, and I think, okay, this is how it has to go on the page. This is how it has to be drawn. This is the layout. And so then we go into thumbnails. So we can see like, okay, it's going to go like this, and then the eye will go back here, and then to there, and all of it'll happen. And so that goes so far as like where you actually add in the dialogue balloons too, because, you don't want the artwork being covered. Sometimes it's easier if the script is written first, but other times, if there's a really good collaboration between the artist and the writer, they should really be collaborating before the script is even written, so that the writer knows like how much each character can say, like that they have that visual, instead of just writing it all and then handing it over to the artist and being like, make it work, like more of a collaboration. So
Yeah. Would you say that those collaborations are the norm, or is it just kind of like the Wild West as people get hired on? Or
it's pretty much the Wild West, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's not like screenwriting. Like everyone has their own different way of writing scripts, which is bizarre. You're constantly just like, oh my God, okay, this is a new format. Like, okay, like
oh, interesting.
it's just really bizarre. Like some of them, like I used to be a certain way of like, oh my God, like I need this in a certain format. Like it has to be the panel description, and then you indent and you do the dialogue and you number it so that the letterer knows what's what, So, I have a certain way to do it, but then other people, they just do whatever. And I'm just like, ugh, and you just have to figure it out. So
yeah, at a certain point, if you can't fight to get people on the same system, then it's just, yeah.
And there's no like comic book writing script program like there is, for screenwriter.
Yeah. I am curious if you have any recommendations for titles, if anybody's interested in getting into comics in general, or interested in looking at things that maybe you've been working on. Do you have anything you'd recommend?
Sure. Yeah, there are a bunch of original titles that, since I do collections, I kind of have my fingers on everything over at IDW. So from licensed to original properties. And I have to say, there's a new one coming out called The Hunger in the Dusk, which is by G. Willow Wilson and written by her. And it's so fun. It is a fantasy book, and we are hashtagging it Hot Orc Summer. And it is
Hot Orc Summer?
Orc Summer. And
awesome.
It is the best. And she created it during the pandemic, and it was like a labor of love. And it shows. And aside from that, I think what I really appreciate is Scott Snyder's Wildfire series, because it's really fun. I had this is funny because when I was interviewing at IDW, I was interviewing with Mark Doyle. And at the time, he was executive editor for originals, and now he's co-publisher. But I got on the call with him, and he was like, oh, so like, what's your vision, for comics? And I said, you know what? I think the issue is, I think when I was at Image, it was always like, oh, all these books are failing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to flip, and we're going to take all these known creators and bring them in. And so then they're going to sell. But now they've overcorrected. And so now you can't get in if you're just a person trying to break in. It's all known people. And so you're basically buried if you're like a newbie. And I said, there needs to be a middle ground where like you have a known creator and an unknown. There needs to be like a pairing so that you can give these unknowns a leg up. And that otherwise the industry's just going to keep closing in on itself, and you're just going to have all these high paid people, that sure they sell, but like where's the industry going to go? And so he was like, I absolutely agree with that, and little did I know that he was literally developing that with Scott Snyder. And so Wildfire is basically a series of their arcs. And Scott wrote the first one with Hayden Sherman, who is a fantastic new artist. And then essentially that's what he's doing, is he is pairing the next stories with known and unknown. And he's doing it to get new talent, to discover new talent and break them in. And I'm like, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I would want, and that's why IDW is, because I'm like, you guys get it. You get it. Like everything is just like, everybody gets along so well, and it's just amazing. And so I would recommend those two original books.
That's so cool. And it's interesting that is a solution to a problem that I think the entire comic or the entire publishing industry has, where it's very much dominated by these known names, and it's almost impossible for unknowns to break in. And unfortunately, there isn't really a similar kind of solution, I feel like, for novelist writers, because it's not collaborative in the way that comics are. So,
Right. Yeah.
it's
I mean, there could be like you could 100% do an excerpt in the back of someone else's book, like a couple
sure.
of chapters from a newbie that, like, that author really wants to support, like a
Hmm.
backup story, maybe, an epilogue or something could be done.
I've seen like anthologies, like fantasy or sci-fi anthologies will do that. Sometimes they'll have kind of a mix, but even those, a lot of times they solicit from more known authors than like unknown ones, unfortunately.
Yep.
But I do think that is problem that every creative industry deals with a lot of how do you bring in the new blood when you're trying to make money and they're not going to make money.
It's marketing as well. And I think that one of the bigger mistakes that companies tend to make is that they market the names. And it's like, well, the names don't really need to be marketed because they're names. And so, sure, some marketing should go into it, but the majority should go into the ones that aren't, which is also something that IDW recognized. And like when they were restructuring, they were looking at things and they're saying, all that's getting marketed was the easy ones, the ones that were
Mm,
lost, like where it's just like, oh, everybody knows Scott Snyder, it's going to be fine. But like, what about these other ones, like Catfight, for instance, like where it's like these two, lesser known creators, but yet they're known in like the LGBTQ community and they've won awards, but like no one knows that because it wasn't marketed. Why isn't this being marketed? And it was because like marketing doesn't think that way. They're just like, oh, this is easy. So, we're going to push the names. No one's going to buy this anyway. So, but it's like, then why did we accept it? Why are we doing it? We have to back what we think is good. We have to, throw all the money behind it. Like there's no other reason not to, like,
why are we doing this at all? Yeah.
if we're not going to back it. And everything we do, we believe in. It's not like we're putting out crap, It's not like,
Right.
yeah.
Well, if you are open to it, Kris, I'd love to play a quick little game with you here.
Mhm.
So we play a game called Name That Book. And I have some prompts here that I'm just going to put it into our randomizer spinner. And then you just kind of name the first book that
Okay.
comes to your mind in response to the prompt. And
Okay.
it can be a comic book, it can be a novel, it can be a short story, whatever you feel fits the prompt accurately. I have to get some kind of randomizer. I meant to bring in a die, and I don't know where my die went. It rolled away somewhere.
I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous. If it's bad, I will cut it out. Start. 4. Okay. Number 4. Name a book that changed your mind about something.
Strangers in Paradise, the comic book series, written by Terry Moore. It was the book that I picked up when I wasn't reading comics, and it changed my life. It totally set me on the trajectory to get into comics. Strangers in Paradise is about two best friends, Francine and Kachu, and Kachu is in love with Francine, but Francine is straight, and Kachu is also just happens to be an assassin. And it was like a slice of life mixed with adventure, and I fell in love with it and tried to get everything I could by Terry Moore. I just absolutely adored that series, and volume after volume after volume came out, and I just ate it up. I ate it up, and it got me into comics. It literally, I was like, I didn't know comics could be this way. I thought it was all just superhero stuff,
Mhm.
and it totally changed my life on that. And then I got to meet him, and I was like, oh my god, he's even nicer in person.
Even better.
Yeah.
What was it the story? Was it the artwork? Was it everything together?
It was both, because Francine was drawn incredibly realistically. She was kind of chunky. She wasn't like, she had a little double chin going on. And Kachu was this beautiful blonde. I even have original artwork on the wall that I got because I was like so like, ugh. And she was this, fantastic assassin, and she just loved this ordinary girl. She just loved her, and it was just like, oh God, it was such a love story. And oh my God. Yeah, it was beautiful.
And that is our show. If you find yourself hungering for a hot orc summer, you can check out The Hunger in the Dusk, Wildfire, and more of Kris's collections on idwpublishing.com. I'll also put some links in the show notes. As always, if you're looking for editing services, reach out to me on my website, midwrite.com, or you can find me on Instagram at midwriteworlds. That's MIDWRITE. If you have any ideas for guests or topics you'd like to see on the show, send them my way at edibuddiespod@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and I'll see you next time.